have the greatest job in the world, and that's working with dogs.
Best in Show winner is the French Bulldog.
Winston won the National Dog Show. It was amazing. It was exciting. And to have a dog to be #1 dog in this country, you have to have great nutrition. And I always fed Pro Plan. Just like us, when we eat well, we feel good. And I just love that food and what it's done all these years to all the dogs I've bred and all the dogs I've shown.
Welcome to Pure Dog Talk. We are so excited to have you here. I am, as always, very excited to have my dear friend Dr. Marty Greer joining us today. And we have a cool topic. This is something that popped up in our Pure Dog Talk patrons group. So if you are not a patron and a member of the private Facebook group, I recommend you go there because this was a really amazing conversation and well worth the support of the show. Second, just a tiny little bit of business. If you guys have not yet checked out the Marty and Laura show, named by our listeners. Hey, aren't you Marty and Laura? So I'm saying at a bathroom in Orlando. You should definitely do that. It is absolutely designed for you, but also your puppy buyers and your cousins, brothers, uncles, nephew, and people that have cats and even fish and all kinds of stuff. So we're really excited about it. We, Marty and I both think that the opportunity to reach the average listening public with good information from reliable sources that just also happen to be purebred dog people is so important. So, business out of the way. Hey, Marty, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you. And it is interesting because a lot of people that sell puppies, a lot of breeders that sell puppies have sold puppies into homes where they go to a regular veterinarian, the local veterinarian. And the first thing they do is say, oh, my breeder said I shouldn't do this or I could do that. And the veterinarian's like, no, we're not doing it that way. And it's really frustrating for me to be in that territory where I'm in between, because we do see some things that breeders request that are absolutely 100% totally reasonable. And then we see some that are a little not. And so as a veterinarian who sees both sides of it, it's a little tricky. So you want to make sure that when you're putting your puppy buyers into a position that they have to speak about something to a veterinarian about a particular breed or a particular line of dogs, that you have some good hard evidence to go with it, that you don't just make stuff up. Things like leptospirosis, we used to say not to vaccinate some breeds for lepto or certain ages for lepto. And now we see so much lepto that you really have to change some of those things. And the vaccine has gotten so much cleaner, so much more purified that there's a whole change of things. So please, as breeders, keep yourself up to date before you start sending your puppy buyers out to their regular veterinarian. And I say that tongue in cheek, because these are the lifeblood of who your puppy people are going to be going to. So don't do anything offensive.
Marty and Laura show is a great way to do that.
Exactly. So we have some good resources. So let's get down to our topic.
So our topic today, which I think is really cool. So this was the question that was dropped into the patrons conversation today, actually. So the poster said that a bitch has had 2 consecutive unsuccessful breedings to the same dog. The first was a mistimed TCI. The second was several side-by-side AIs correctly timed. Stud dog is 8 years old, but the semen quality was good. What's your next recommendation? And so there was a bunch of things thrown around, conversation within the group. And so Marty and I are going to talk about some of that, some of what she agrees with and disagrees with, and suggestions of her own. So this is a great way to kind of combine all of our pieces in one place. So I'm excited.
Right. So we'll start with, what does good semen mean?
Right.
Because everyone has their own definition. So I'm going to start by saying, how do we know the semen quality was good? Has he previously sired a litter? If he has sired a litter, how long ago was it? If he has ever sired a litter, we know he doesn't have fragmented DNA or some other weird condition. If he hasn't sired a litter for 2 years, that doesn't mean that his semen quality is still good. And looking a drop under the microscope, just taking a drop of semen and peering under the microscope and seeing something swimming, does not constitute a semen analysis. So I just want to be really, really clear about what is your definition of good semen quality. There are 6 parameters that we should look at for semen quality. It should be volume, count,
Hmm.
so the sperm count,
Right.
the motility, the
Yeah.
morphology,
Right.
the longevity. In other words, how long does it live once it's out of the dog
Hmm.
in something like an extender, not just sitting on a slide under the microscope.
Hmm.
Um, and so that gives us a lot of information to go on.
Right.
And the average dog should have their body weight times 10 should be their semen count in millions. So
Okay.
a 10-pound dog should have 100 million sperm. A 50-pound dog should have 500 million, otherwise known as half a billion. A 100-pound dog should have a billion sperm in his total count. So looking at it under the microscope doesn't say you've done a semen analysis. It says you see something swimming under the microscope, but we don't know how long it lives. We don't know its morphology, meaning is it shaped correctly. We don't know its motility, which means is it swimming in the right direction. We don't know its speed of progression, which is the one of the 6 parameters I just left out, which means how fast is it swimming forward. A P1 is it sluggishly moving on the slide. A P5
Meandering.
means zoom across the slide like woof, lightning speed. So those are the 6 parameters you need. And so if you're going to a veterinarian that says they're going to do a semen analysis, you need to get all 6 of those to get what I would consider to be a semen analysis that you should pay for. Now, it's going to cost you some money to get a semen collection because they'll charge for the collection and they'll charge for the analysis, but it shouldn't cost you a lot of money. It should be reasonable. And when we look at longevity, we basically put a drop or 2 of the semen into extender, put it in the refrigerator, take it out 24 hours later, warm it up, take it out 48 hours later, warm it up. And I've had semen in our refrigerator, or in one case, I threw it in the back of my Cadillac, my Escalade, and drove it around for a week and a half just to see how long it would live
You
in
could
really
make
cold
it die.
temperatures. Yeah, and 10 days later, I pulled it out of the Escalade and I put a drop under the microscope and the darn stuff was still swimming. So that tells us about longevity, and
Right.
normal semen should live a long time. But
Mm.
if you have a problem with the prostate, the semen may look good when it comes out, but the um, time that it sits in the prostatic fluid, you'll start to see the semen slow down and die.
Mm.
If it's got 2 heads, if it has no tail, if it has a proximal droplet, which is like a really fat neck on the sperm, if you see any of those things, it's probably not normal. And you should see less than 20% abnormality. So 80% or more should be normal. You should know what your sperm count is. You multiply their weight by 10, and that all should give you some good information. If you look at the semen and it's got blood in it, you got a problem. If you look at the semen and it's got urine in it, or it's got pus in it, you got a problem.
Mm.
So those are all things that can be very easily assessed. It's much easier to analyze the fertility on a male dog than it is a female. So I don't want to sound like I'm picking on the boys,
No, but
but
that's a great start.
you
That's a
can't look
great place to
inside.
start.
Yeah, you can't look inside the bitch, but you can look
Well, I
at
mean,
the
you
semen.
can, but it takes a lot longer. It's a
Well,
little
it
more
takes some
invasive.
anesthesia. Yeah,
Invasive.
it's not a good thing to do.
Right.
So I always start with the boys,
Mm.
and that's just practical, good information. If they ejaculate and get urine into the ejaculate, that's going to kill the sperm. If they have blood in the ejaculate, it won't kill the sperm, but it means your dog has a problem with either a trauma to his penis or a prostate issue. If he
Mhm.
has a prostate issue and he's over age 5, you don't have to neuter him, but you need to get him on medication that will improve his semen quality. So there's a whole array of things that can happen. And it's not that hard to figure out if you go to a veterinarian that does any kind of repro. And they now have a semen analysis that goes on an iPad called iSperm. And for under $4,000, your veterinarian or you can buy this device that you take the semen, you put it on this little lens, you put it onto the lens of the iPad. It has a program that it runs, and you can do a semen analysis on dog sperm, cow sperm, pig sperm, whatever species you want to do.
Wild.
And so your vet can now, if they say to you, well, it's really expensive for me to buy the equipment. Well, a CASA system runs $30,000 to $50,000 for the big one. But for under $4,000, you can buy the iSperm.
Wow.
And and if
That's
you
crazy.
feel like your vet does enough work and they're unwilling to do it, get together with your breed club or your friends
Mhm.
and say, let's buy the vet clinic a Christmas present, and
Yeah.
we're going to gift them a $4,000 iPad. And now, guess what? They can do it. And I taught an
Cool.
8-year-old girl to do this, watching it once. She turned around and did the analysis in 90 seconds. An 8-year-old girl learned to do this. So don't tell me it's too
Awesome.
hard.
Awesome. I love this. Okay. So, step 1, do an actual semen analysis. not just
Yes.
the semen is good because it comes out of his body and it's cloudy. I,
Right.
it's
And
like,
I actually
I've seen
I actually
this.
got a semen analysis years ago from someone who
Mm.
was very knowledgeable about bovine semen, but not so much about dog. And the semen analysis on the paperwork said better collection than last time, 3 squirts instead of 2. This is not a semen analysis, folks.
No.
So, sperm count, sperm volume, or semen volume, motility, morphology, speed of progression, and longevity. Those are your 6 parameters. Expect it from your veterinarian if you're going to somebody doing repro or that wants to learn to do repro. Teach them how to do it and buy an iSperm. It's not that hard.
Got
So,
it. Got it.
boys
Okay.
off. We're done.
So, about the female, there were a number of conversations about could the sort of lifestyle things about the female be
Yes.
different? Could she be eating a diet that was impacting her fertility? So,
Yes,
we talked about this
absolutely.
before, but run us through why, say, your average, even exciting over the counter special mail order, whatever it is, dog food doesn't have or does or doesn't have what you need.
Right. So the 4 things that you can see on the label when you buy dog food are carbohydrate, fat, protein, and fiber.
Mhm.
Easy to figure out. It's not those parameters that are significant when we look at the fertility issue.
Right.
For most clients, if the dog has normal stools and has good hair coat, they assume the food is good.
Right.
Because what else do you measure, right? How much hair do they shed and how much poop do you have to pick up? It's pretty simple.
Mhm.
Well, if they're having fertility issues, it's usually because of a micronutrient issue. And those are going to be the amino acids, the minerals, the vitamins, the stuff that on the label, either you can't compare labels, you can't look at one bag of food and
Right.
the other and compare it because they don't list those by numbers. And
Mhm.
anything below salt in the ingredient list is a micronutrient. So that's going to be vitamins and minerals and things that you really don't have a good way to measure or compare one bag of food to another. So you can stand at the store and look at 2 labels and still not really know what the micronutrients are. Basically, we do this on what we've experienced for performance of the diets. And we see 2 diet brands that are really quite good, and then a whole bunch that are really average, and then a whole bunch that are really not good.
Mhm.
So I'm not going to call out anybody for not being good because it could change, and I don't want to put anything in a recording that if they turn around and correct it could be significant. There was an article published by Farmina about a year ago that was really interesting, comparing their regular Farmina with a from Farmina that they made to be for fertility. But what I couldn't tell from reading the article is if this diet was commercially available or
Mm.
one that was experimental, and if it was commercially available, if it was available in the United States or only in the European countries.
Mm.
So there's definitely an article out there that talks about the micronutrients and the impact on fertility. It's pretty significant.
Okay.
The foods that we see that we have good success with, am I allowed to mention those?
Yes.
Are going to be Purina and Royal Canin. Those are the 2 diets that we reliably see good fertility
Yep.
with. Purina, their Sport 30/20, which is 30% protein, 20% fat, is a really good diet for fertility. And the Royal Canin makes a pregnancy diet, the only pregnancy diet that currently is on the market that I'm aware of, because like I said, at this point, I don't think Farmina is making that diet. At least if it is, it's not something that I'm aware of. And the pregnancy diet is called HT42D. It's made by Royal Canin, and it stands for heat HT. So you feed it from the time you want the vicious heat to start to the 42nd day of pregnancy. So HT42D. And on the 43rd day of pregnancy, the day you start your panicure, is the day that you switch her to a puppy food. So those are the 2 diets that we have very good success with. There are several that will remain
Name.
unmentioned on the podcast, but if anybody directly calls me, I will not put it in typed email. So don't email me and think I'm going to tell you, or text me and think I'm going to tell you. I will tell you verbally over the phone whose diets I don't think we see good success with. And there are a number of them.
Mhm.
I had a couple of years ago, I was at one of my trade shows, and there was a young Amish breeder that came to me, and he was in Ohio at the trade show, but lived in Missouri. He'd put his wife, his kids, and himself in the white van and driven from Missouri to Ohio, which, as you know, is no small trek.
Mhm.
And he came to me at the booth at Revival, and he said to me, "So, Dr. Greer, I'm having a problem." And I said, what's going on? And he said, I have 20 bitches that I breed and nobody's coming into heat. And if they do come into heat, they're not getting pregnant. And I said, okay. So what are you feeding? And he told me, and I said that this is what I want you to do. I want you to get back in the van, drive back to Missouri. As soon as you get home, I want you to go to the feed mill and change the food you're feeding. And he called Marilyn at Revival a month later, and he said, 10 of the bitches have come into heat.
Mm.
And he called Marilyn another month later and said the first 10 that came into heat are pregnant,
Right.
and the second 10 are now in heat. He bred them all. He had 20 litters.
Jesus.
Thank God, because the same month he fell off of a ladder, had a very serious injury, and without the income from the dogs, he would have not been able to survive. I also had a client that came in who had a really interesting story. He had golden retrievers. And oh, by the way, the Amish guy, Sam, had large breed dogs. So he had 20 large litters,
Jesus.
10 and up. So he had 200 plus puppies. The other guy had 3 golden retrievers that he came in with. He had a male and 2 females. And he said, I'm having a problem with fertility. And I said, okay, what's going on? And he said, well, none of my bitches are cycling. Now, with my males are breeding outside bitches, they're getting them pregnant. So I don't think it's the boys, but the girls aren't cycling. And if they cycle, they're not getting pregnant. And I said, okay, what are you feeding? And he said, it's a really good diet, which is always a sign it's really not. And I said, okay, so tell me what that is. And he said, well, I have it made at the feed mill. My in-laws have had this line of dogs for 50 years, and the feed mill has made us food because they used to raise mink, which was very common in Wisconsin.
Right.
And that's really a common place that a lot of the pet foods started. From started as mink food. A lot of the companies started as mink feed because that was what people fed in the 50s.
Sure.
So in the 50s and later, they were making food for him at the feed mill. And I said, well, let's check that out. So we went to the feed mill and he called me back and he said, guess what? I said, what? He said, for the last 2 years, they have not added the vitamin and mineral pack to the food. They've been adding all the protein, all the cereal, all the meat, all the stuff they were supposed to. And I never heard why they had if they forgot, if somebody changed
For
jobs,
2 years?
if it got expensive. Well, but if it falls off the radar and then you make it the next time, you just keep doing the same thing over and over again. And I said, okay, as soon as you get home, I want you to go to the store, buy a bag of food. He came back a month later and 2 of the bitches had already come into heat. The 2 that he brought in had come into heat. We progesterone tested the older one because he said she's got to get pregnant. So we progesterone tested her. She ovulated. She had a litter. The other bitch didn't get pregnant, but guess what? She didn't ovulate. So it was pretty interesting that we can see that much of an impact, because you would think, how would you know if the vitamin and mineral, it seems like it should be in the protein and the
I'm
carbohydrates,
sorry.
right?
I buy my dog food from ProPlan, so I
Yeah.
know the
So
stuff's
you know what
in
I'm
there.
saying? Yeah. And they do analysis, like every batch
Right.
that comes off of a
Right.
pet food line gets
Right.
a sample pulled and they analyze
Right.
it and then they hold it for, I don't know, like 2 years or something. I mean, they have very high, strict and, important quality controls. And that's why we do it. Homemade diets tend to be a problem because they tend to have either excesses or deficiencies. If you're feeding raw, they tend to have problems with bacteria and parasites. I had a 8-month-old breeding female cat that came in about 2 months ago that had a pyometra at 8 months.
Wow.
I said, well, what do you feed? And she said raw.
A cat?
I said, okay, so yeah, oh yeah, cat people feed raw too. And she said, yeah, I'm feeding raw. And I said, what would it take you to convince you to at least cook the raw food? And she said, well, do you think that's important? And I said, okay, she eats raw food, like E. coli and stuff is in it. And then she turns around and licks her vulva and she inoculates with her tongue with the raw food on it. She's like, yeah. Yeah, let's cook the food. So, I'm saying that there's a lot of things that are happening with pet food, and we assume that the food is okay, but just because the coat and the poop looks good doesn't mean it's going to support a healthy pregnancy or healthy sperm production. So please, 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 nutrition, when someone calls and says, I have a problem with fertility, the first 3 questions I ask are, what do you feed? What else do you feed? And what supplements are they on? Because no matter what people are feeding, they're adding something to their food. It doesn't matter if it's a vitamin or a mineral or vegetables or meat or whatever they're at. Blueberries are big, people feed, oh, I feed blueberries. Because that somehow magically fixes everything that's wrong with pet food.
Oh,
Because they all think,
I thought it was coconut oil.
well, that too. We see a lot of that. The last dog that tried to eat me today, not the last dog today, but the last dog that tried to eat me today, they were feeding coconut oil because they thought it would improve his coat. Well, it didn't improve his attitude any, I'll tell you that. because he
Wow.
wanted to eat me, literally
Wow.
wanted to eat me. And he was
Wow.
big enough to have
Yeah.
accomplished it.
Not good.
Trupanion is revolutionizing medical insurance for pets by providing the best possible experience to our members. And it's not some space-age dream. It's happening now. We pay your veterinarian directly while you're checking out, and we're the only ones who can, which means you have decisions in seconds, and you don't have to wait for reimbursement. So unlike with other providers, you'll keep more money in your pocket. Ask your veterinarian if Trupanion can pay them directly, because there's pet insurance, and then there's Trupanion.
Boy dogs, food. One of the people in the group suggested something about not having had enough sunlight, daylight,
Yeah.
and I've always kind of subscribed to the notion that that was sort of a Fruby art major myth, but you're saying
No.
no. Talk to me about that.
No, it does have a lot to do with it. Dogs are seasonally estrus.
Mhm.
They seasonally cycle. Like I can tell you, starting December 22nd, by January 1st, every bitch in the county is coming into heat. As soon as the days start to get longer,
Right.
bitches start cycling. So our repro board goes from, oh yeah, there's a few here around, and it's not because of Christmas, but
Right.
it's because the days are short. There's a few dogs that are cycling at, Thanksgiving and at Christmas, and then January 1st happens, and
Mm.
all hell breaks loose. Every bitch starts to cycle. She's like, daylight, yay, let's come into heat. So I've actually done a consult with a client who called me and she said my bitches aren't cycling, and we went through the food thing. And then I said, well, where do you keep your dogs? And she said, well, they're in the basement, they're in the lower level. And I said, okay, well, what's that like? And she said, well, there are windows. And I said, okay, well, why don't we FaceTime and you walk me into your basement? So she walks me down the stairs and she walks me into the room that her dogs are in. And yes, her dogs are in crates, which is great. And yes, she had windows in the basement, but every crate had so much crap piled on top of it that the dogs weren't getting any sunlight. So again, it gets back to those kinds of things is dogs need 14 hours of daylight. And if you don't have the opportunity to have it, if you don't live in a climate that you can do that, or your building isn't set up for it, or whatever it happens to be, you can get full spectrum light bulbs and turn them on for 14 hours a day. Don't think that saving the money on the electricity bill is worth having infertile bitches.
Mm.
So put your bitches, if you have a room with big windows, put them in front of the big windows. Get rid of the crap that's sitting on top of their crates. Get rid of all the stuff sitting around the room. And I say this with all the best in my heart, because I'll tell you, I have stuff on top of my crates too. And then I realized that's really not a good idea. Like that extra box of blankets, like, oh yeah, I should probably move that. So those are the things to keep in mind. That's not where you store your ice chest and all your dog show gear. You need to put it where the dogs get daylight. So it really does have an impact. So what do you feed? What else do you feed? What supplements are they on? What's their environment? Those are all really important things because that plays a huge role in cycling and fertility, and it affects the males as well. So it's not just the girls that have to have good nutrition. It's
Right.
the boys. It's not just the girls that need to have good sunlight. It's the boys too. So and then of course we have to worry about too much heat. Like if you
Right.
live in a climate where it's really hot, the boys can go out and lay on the asphalt or the
Cook their
concrete or the pea
parts.
gravel. Yeah, their testicles can overheat, and then you can have a drop in fertility. And there are definitely dogs that don't have good fertility certain times of the year because of heat. We also see dogs that are high performing dogs if they're traveling with a handler, or they're out on field trial. They're out field trials every weekend and they're running hard,
Mm.
or hunt tests or whatever activity you happen to be doing. Sometimes just being away from home can be really stressful for the boys and the girls, and we can see that affecting their fertility. So again, think about those things. I had my dog out with a handler until yesterday, and we tucked her under our arm and brought her home because she needs to come into heat and
Mm.
she needs to get bred because she's produced the number one puppy in the country right now, and we need more of those.
Yes.
So yes, I would like to leave her with a handler, but no, that isn't going to happen because
Yeah.
she can't get pregnant if she's not with me.
Uh-huh. Okay. So apparently in this conversation that sort of triggered this conversation, the individual who was working with the owner of the bitch had suggested an exploratory surgery to go in and dig around amok in the internals. How do we feel about that as step one after she didn't get pregnant?
Well, it's not for me step one, but it is a step on the list. If
Mm,
I have a bitch that gets pregnant with 1 or 2 puppies and should have had more and resorbed a litter at the C-section, I biopsy the uterus. So do not pass up that opportunity. I never spay at C-section, and if I
right.
see that the bitch has resorbed puppies, I will take a uterine biopsy from the incision where I made the incision to take out the puppies,
Mhm.
and then I take another one where I can feel a resorption site. And resorption sites at C-section look really suspicious for something that could be more serious. It's
Mm,
got this gray, slimy, yellowish, kind of mucusy stuff.
gross.
And that's the resorption site where the puppy was.
Mhm.
That's the perfect place to biopsy. And
Right.
last year and the year before, Dr. Premerandin and Dr. Runkin at Ohio State, the Ohio State University Vet School, were collecting uterine biopsies on bitches that had had successful pregnancies that hadn't missed and didn't have resorption so that they would have enough, they would have 100
Mhm.
normal biopsies so
Mhm.
they could compare a normal biopsy with what happened at this litter that resorbed. So in that particular case, I am going in there and mucking around, but I'm
Mm.
doing it to do a C-section. And as long as
Right.
I'm there, I'm going to collect a sample because why wouldn't you? You've already got the uterus in
Sure.
your hand,
Right.
the abdomen's open, collect the
Sure.
sample. On the other hand, there are some bitches that I will take to surgery to do diagnostics with an exploratory. I don't look at all the abdominal organs. I'm really only looking at the ovaries and the uterus. And yes, then I will biopsy and flush biopsy and culture, but that is my last resort
Okay.
before I finally throw up my arms and say, there's nothing more I can do for your bitch. And
Right.
you don't want to biopsy the uterus at the time of a surgical breeding, because that's the other temptation is to say, well, why don't I just take biopsy when we're in there at the
Right.
uterine of the uterus while we're in there doing a surgical insemination? And you're kind of pissing off the uterus. Like the uterus doesn't like it when you put a hole in it and
Mhm.
sew it up. And that's at a time the uterus should be happy and calm and ready for a pregnancy and not going, yeah, yuck, you just touched me and
Right.
you just did
Right.
stuff to
Right.
me and I
You
don't
poked
like
me.
it.
Right.
Yeah. So
Okay.
so I don't recommend it, although I have seen another clinician do it and the dog did end up with a pregnancy. It would not be my recommendation. I think that's just asking for trouble. But in our practice, we have the affectionately known shorthand infertile bitch protocol, because we have so many dogs that come to us that have fertility issues. I mean, normal dogs can come to us for frozen semen breedings and that kind of thing, but we see a lot of bitches, like a lot of other veterinarians that do repro,
Mhm.
that have had fertility issues, because if you had good fertility, you don't need us. You can just bang it out in your backyard and you're good. But if we're not getting bitches pregnant, we need to
Right.
see what the semen looks like. We need to talk about your history. How
Right.
often is she cycling? That's a really key part too, is they need at least 4.5 months between heat cycles to have a fertile cycle. So if she's cycling every 3.5 months,
Mhm.
it's not that she's not ovulating. It's that her uterus says, no, no, you cannot get pregnant.
Mm,
I am not ready for you.
mm,
So we have the infertile bitch protocol that we go through. And so we have it abbreviated because we use it so often that my staff just circles on the form, infertile bitch protocol, indicated, not indicated.
mm.
And so we don't do it on dogs that have normal fertility, but
Right.
we do have it as our fallback. And so there's some very specific recommendations that we can make that are helpful in getting bitches pregnant, but there is absolutely no guarantee. And one of the things that we really have a significant lack of ability to do in veterinary medicine are some of these fertility workups. Like a woman that has fertility issues, they're
Mhm.
going to do a salpingogram, which means that they're going to inject a contrast material into her uterus and see if it goes up the oviducts. And are the oviducts open to the ovaries, and can eggs get from the ovary down into the oviduct where fertilization takes place, and can then they make it down into the uterus, and is the uterus happy, and can the placenta form, and can the babies develop? And we don't have the ability to do salpingograms in dogs. It doesn't exist.
Right.
So we definitely have limitations, which is why we lean so heavily on the boys and nutrition and
Mhm.
environment and
Mhm.
some of these other factors to make sure that there's nothing we can, like if we can fix those things
Mhm.
easily,
Mhm.
we're going to fix those. So I have some recommendations. We do two, two, and two. So we do two nutritional supplements, two anti-inflammatories, and on occasion we will use antibiotic, but by no means
Just
is
what I
this
was coming to
routine.
ask. Yeah.
This is
But do you
not
use
routine.
antibiotics? Okay.
So please, as a breeder, do not start your dog on antibiotics without your veterinarian's discussion. Don't go in there and say, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that, because we have to be good stewards of antibiotic use. And that means the more antibiotics we use for things that didn't need antibiotics, the more likely we are to have problems with antibiotic resistance when we really need them. So it may affect your kennel, it may affect you. You may end up with a MRSA. We're starting to see MRSAs in dogs now,
Are you-
and we don't want, yeah, it's the real thing. So we don't want a MRSA that ends
No.
up affecting someone in your life,
Mm-mm.
a family member that's immunocompromised or something else, because you willy-nilly said, well, I'm just going to put my dog on amoxicillin and Baytril and doxycycline and this and that and the other thing. It's harder to get those antibiotics now because they've cut off some of the supplies because we haven't been good stewards. The livestock industry is really strict. We have to be strict on the pet side. So we cannot just say, here's some antibiotics, it'll fix everything. Do you have the Purdue chicken commercials where
Yes.
they
Yeah.
say that you can't fix everything by throwing antibiotics at it?
Yeah.
And there's a woman who throws a handful of antibiotics under the hood of our car. My favorite one is the one that throws it at the computer screen, and you're like, yeah, antibiotics don't fix that. So please think about your antibiotic use. Don't save some back from another dog. Don't use your own. If you get them, use the full course, and do not just randomly put your dog on antibiotics. Please, please, please. Bad idea.
Got it. Couple last things that might fall into differentials that are a little more out there in terms of possibilities. Cysts, ovarian cysts, and should we consider just using a different dog? Talk about some of the like genetic
Sure.
yucky that go with that.
So we can see ovarian cysts and we can see uterine cysts. And so I want to be really clear about which one we're talking about. Ovarian cysts usually interfere with the ability of the dog to complete her ovulatory cycle. So that's why when we progesterone test, we want to make sure her progesterone hits 5 and beyond. We want one test beyond the 5. If she has an ovarian cyst, chances are she won't get pregnant. If it takes her more than 21 days from the start of her heat cycle to ovulate, chances are she won't get pregnant. That's reality. Uterine cysts are a whole different thing. That's cystic endometrial hyperplasia, CEH, really common in Bernese Mountain Dogs and a number of other breeds. And we see lines of dogs now that we're seeing pyometras in, and it's probably secondary to cystic endometrial hyperplasia in some cases. There may be more than one kind of pyometra that we don't know about yet. And again, this is a reason not to just randomly put your dog on antibiotics, is if she does end up with a pyometra and you want to manage her medically, you need an antibiotic that's going to work. And if you used amoxicillin and doxycycline and Baytril and then cycled back through those again over and over, you're going to have bacteria in your environment that are not going to respond to those antibiotics. So cystic endometrial hyperplasia is little bubbles. It looks like bubble wrap on the inside of the uterus, and the uterine lining should be smooth and pink and shiny and happy. And that's why breeding younger bitches give us bigger litters than older bitches, is because over the course of heat cycles, the cysts start to form and they can become pretty numerous. So if you take a dog to a surgical insemination and your vet said, I ruptured the cysts, I just did one of these 2 weeks ago. She had a lot of cysts, and I'm like, I can rupture these, but I'm going to tell you, I think the chances of her getting pregnant are 2, slim, and none, because she had such a bad uterine lining. So we bred her anyway because we didn't have to thaw out semen. We had fresh semen. It was like, well, they don't get pregnant unless you put the semen in them. So we did it, but I didn't hold a lot of hope out that she was going to get pregnant because of the cystic endometrial hyperplasia. And rupturing the cysts at the breeding will, of course, reduce the number of cysts. But when the uterine lining is that abnormal, and then you kind of
make it
frustrate
mad
it, you kind of upset
again.
it, you make it mad by
Yeah.
rupturing those cysts. It's not a cool thing. So those are the cysts. Your second question was
a different dog, because I know there
different
has
dog.
been, I've seen conversation about this. I've seen studies on this, that there are simply genetic mismatches. The body just says,
There.
no, we're not doing this.
There are. And so if the definition of an insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome. So I know you really like the stud dog. I'm sure he's met all of his clearances. I'm sure he's an amazing dog. But if you've bred to him twice and you didn't get puppies, then either there's a genetic incompatibility, which I have diagnosed one time on a uterine biopsy. It was a bitch that was bred by Dr. Hutchinson in Ohio a number of years ago. The bitch didn't get pregnant. The client came in and said, let's biopsy your uterus. And if you decide to do that, the general consensus, we don't really know the best time, but it's probably around the time she would have puppies, because that's when the uterine lining would be at its most inflamed because of the progesterone. So we biopsied the uterus, and I got the report back from the diagnostic lab, and they said genetic incompatibility. I sent the fax over to Dr. Hutchinson. This was before we emailed stuff. And he must have been standing next to the fax machine when it came off, because he picked up the phone immediately. He calls me, he goes, Marty, this is Bob. I'm like, what? He's like, did you see this report? I said, yeah, I just sent it to you. He's like, oh my God, I've never seen one of these. So this is not common. If Hutch
Not
hasn't seen more than one,
Right.
and I haven't seen
Right.
more than one, and we do a lot of repro, it's not common. But COI is an important consideration. So that's coefficient of inbreeding. And just based on the COI, which is a number that you can calculate a number of different ways with a computer program, if you're starting to get too tight with your line breedings, you probably are going to see smaller litters down to no litters. So you may need to consider an outcross. And I know there's advantages to line breeding. I line breed. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not saying it's good. I know the only way you're going to get consistency in your lines is to have line breeding. And I think that's important. But COI can be really helpful in determining if you're getting too close, or just looking at the genetics. There's Embark does pair predictor and matchmaker, and some other companies are coming along and doing something similar, trying to compare the genetics of one line of dogs to another. The Dandy Ditmont breed did a really nice project. That might be something fun to have on, where they looked at COI and they did a more diverse breeding with the expectation of improving their genetic diversity, but still having dogs that look like Dandy Ditmonts that you could be competitive in the show ring with. Because what good is a Dandy Ditmont if it's ugly as sin? There's desirable parts about the traits that we want.
Right.
That's why we have breeds of dogs. So I think that's important, that we look at COI and not get so close in a line breeding that you end up in trouble.
Perfect.
So that's that. And I still have the 2 twos. So we'll talk
was
about
the
that
other
when
two?
we're done. Well, the two twos are 2 nutritional supplements.
Right.
So if I have a bitch that we want to come into heat, or she's coming into heat and we want to get good fertility, we use 2 nutritional supplements. I use B Strong, which is Revival, and I use ICSB, International Canine Semen Bank CF Plus, which is really a male dog fertility supplement, but we see good improvement in the female. So this is my infertile bitch protocol: is 2 nutritional supplements, B Strong and ICSB CF Plus, and 2 rounds of an anti-inflammatory, either Metacam or Rimadyl. The first round on days 2, 3, and 4 after ovulation. And then the second round during that same heat cycle on days 15, 16, and 17 post-ovulation. There were 2 articles published that showed that there was a 50% increase in fertility when that protocol was used, not the nutritional stuff, but the Metacam or Rimadyl, Carprofen and Meloxicam. So if you're having fertility issues, or you're suspicious that you might have a problem, or you're using really, really, really valuable semen, we have routinely started using on days 2, 3, and 4, and 15, 16, and 17 post-ovulation, an anti-inflammatory. And it makes sense, because extender and semen can be inflammatory. The TCI can be inflammatory to the uterus. So we want the uterus to be nice and happy. We want it to be a nice, wonderful, warm, cozy place. So on days 2, 3, and 4 is when ovulation is taking place and fertilization is taking place in the oviducts. So if the oviducts are happy and open and they're not inflamed, the semen and the egg can get together and they can make a little baby. That's how this works. And then on days 15, 16, and 17, that's when placentas form and implant, because they don't, the egg doesn't go to the uterine wall. It has to float around for a while, and it has to make an embryo, and then it has to make a fetus, and then it has to make a placenta, and then the placenta has to attach to the uterine wall. And in dogs and cats and pigs, they have a zonary placenta. I think placentas are fascinating. They have a little band like an equator around their belly, and it goes all the way around. And if the uterus isn't happy, the placenta doesn't have a good attachment, and then you don't have a good, healthy pregnancy. So when we see puppies that are born in a uterus that are little ones and big ones, like there's a whole bunch of little ones, people are like, oh, they were premature. No, all the eggs ovulate at the same time. All the eggs get fertilized at the same time. If you have a little tiny puppy, it's because it had a crappy piece of real estate. It was that, place like up when you drive through the mountains and you see that little tree, that little scraggly looking tree, way up above the frost line, and where there's no dirt and it's just barely hanging on to life. It's like this tall. That's a crappy piece of real estate. The big fat trees are at the bottom of the hill, bottom of the mountain, where the dirt is good and the climate is good. And that's what happens to our placentas, is if they don't get a good placental attachment, you have a little bitty 2-ounce puppy born next to a great big 16-ounce puppy that was hogging all the room.
Mm-hmm.
So I want people to think about that anti-inflammatory protocol, and I'm happy to send you the
Like
articles
that.
because there are two, and we can put
Yeah.
them on your website so people
Yeah.
can
We'll
read them
put them up.
and then take them to your vet so they
Yes.
feel like you're coming in with science. We're going to circle back to that. Go to your vet with science instead of woo woo. We want to do this. Go to your vet with science that actually shows that there's some reason, some evidence-based medicine for doing this protocol. So that's what I got.
Be strong. When do you start it and how long do you run it?
I started
Just
when I
had this
want the bitch to
question the
come
other
in.
day.
Yeah, when I want the bitch to come into heat.
Okay.
Because a lot of bitches, you'll be sitting there at like 5 months, 6 months and going, it'd be really nice. It's gonna be a good time of year for me to have puppies. My son's not getting married. It's not gonna be a blizzard. It's gonna be a good time to have puppies. I'd like her to come into heat. So you start the Be Strong, and frequently for bitches that have been between cycles for a longer period of time than you would like, the Be Strong and the ICSB CF Plus in combination will bring these bitches into heat. Like I have an employee who wanted to breed her
Wow.
bitch, and she said to me, she's not coming into heat. I want you to put her on cabergoline, which is the drug we use. It's a human drug, so it's an off label. And I said, you're not going to put her on cabergoline until you've done 2 weeks of ICSB CF plus and the Be Strong. She's like, okay, I know. Because she works in my repro department.
Right.
She knows I
Right.
say this all day long.
Right.
And then, so on day 12, she sends me a picture on her cell phone of her bitch's vulva.
Like, not
Like,
everybody gets hoo-hoos, just,
no,
randomly.
no,
Yeah.
no. And I said, well, I guess we're not going to need cabergoline then, are we? And she's like, nope, she's in heat. She had 7 puppies. It was
Awesome.
great.
Awesome.
So it works. This stuff works. So use your nutrition, use your daylight,
Be
use your
strong. How long?
anti-inflammatories
How long do you run the Be Strong?
from the day you want her to come into heat
Yep.
until the puppies are born.
Okay. That's what I can remember. Perfect.
And even longer if you want to. I mean, it's a B vitamin. It's not going to hurt her. And it improves the appetite. So if she's not eating well when she's pregnant, she's not eating well when she's whelping, that's a good way to stimulate her appetite with a B vitamin instead of some crazy drug. Because some of these drugs that we have are wonderful, but they're not labeled for pregnant and nursing bitches. So let's stick to the stuff that we know is safe. B vitamins.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Gotta have it. Thank you, Marty.
Of course.
Have a great night.